Mary Cortani was a canine handler during her time in the Army. She has since become the founder and executive director of Operation Freedom Paws, or OFP. OFP is a nonprofit organization that benefits veterans and individuals living with disabilities to restore their freedom through a special human-canine bond. In this episode, we talk about the benefits of the canine relationship for many of the humans that Mary serves, and we talk about how she integrates Stella's innovative SGB treatment into her programming. Let's drop in. Welcome, Mary.
Oh, thank you, Shauna. It's my pleasure to be here with you.
You know, we were talking just for a few minutes in the sort of pre-show chit-chat about trauma and really what has been going on lately in the world around us in terms of mass shootings, that have been on the news and the nature of trauma. And you had a few reflections on what that means for some of the people in your circle that you serve and treat as the co-founder and lead for Operation Freedom Paws. Can you say more about that?
Sure. So here at Operation Freedom Paws, we see all kinds of different traumas because we provide service dogs for veterans, first responders, children, and non-veterans. But with the world events, and especially the events of the 4th of July, um, it really hit when you and I were talking, before this with regards to the mass
Yeah.
shootings. And trauma, it can be different things for different people. But one of the things that resonates with me is repeated exposure.
Mm-hmm.
And it can come from things that happened in childhood where somebody may believe that they had dealt with it and moved on, to, the veterans being exposed to repeated killings or watching buddies die, to, first responders rushing in and seeing horrible things all the time, to non-veterans having loss, right? So much
Right.
loss in your life can also create trauma. And if you wind up having multiple traumas, whether it's a culmination of childhood through your life experience, at some point, there's going to be a breaking point where your mind and body can't take it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with
It
that
just
said,
builds and builds.
it builds and builds, and
Mm-hmm.
we all react differently to it, right? There's no canned response, just like there's no canned response for grief. We have
Mm-hmm.
to work through it in our processes and work through it. Now, for a lot of folks, it could be cultural, it could be military, it could be work experience, it could be family, been taught to stuff it, right? I just had a conversation with someone where if they didn't keep their thoughts about what they were feeling and thinking with regards to the flashback or what was inside their head, they
Mm-hmm.
felt they were being judged and criticized. And I'm saying that for a reason here because with the events of July 4th and all of the mass shootings that have occurred in our recent history, especially this year, right?
Yeah.
Um, for us, we have worked with folks in our community as well as a client who was at the Gilroy Garlic Festival in July of 2019 and survived a mass shooting that occurred there. Um, there were 5 killed and there were 17 wounded, and it could have been far worse had we not had law enforcement presence,
Right.
and had they not responded as quickly as they did, right? Um,
Right.
but so with the events of July 4th, it is triggered with our client that going back to that, and in this case it triggered it in a different way because we've worked really hard on the healing process, and she has her
Mm-hmm.
service dog and she's doing the other modalities like talk therapy and mindfulness and her service dog, right?
Right.
um but it created this overwhelming sadness that she could not control,
Mm.
and
Mm.
she kind of knew where it was coming from, but she couldn't put it into words. And part of her then went to, have I really moved down the healing road? Have I really, gotten beyond this?
So
And
let me
so
give
she,
some jump in there and
yeah,
give some context to folks because
yeah,
it'll take a few weeks to produce this. So Mary Cortani and I are talking on July 6th. And this is 2 days after July 4th when we had a recent mass shooting in Highland Park. We also have had the Uvalde, Texas mass shooting, as well as many others. It's shocking if you look up the data on this, how many we have seen in the past year. To your point, Mary, and your client was involved in a mass shooting, was present at the Gilroy Garlic Festival in 2019, July 28th. So she has a kind of general trauma anniversary going on. And then there was a trauma of the Highland Park shooting that just happened right on or around the anniversary of a time when she's especially vulnerable. So just want to give that context in terms of timelines and to give the listeners a little bit of that understanding of when we're talking. So please
no,
jump
and
back in.
thank you for doing that, Shauna, because, I was so focused in the present moment, I didn't even put together that it was an anniversary month,
Uh huh.
right? And so
Yeah.
you're putting that together and explains a few more things that I can help her
Hmm.
with regards to what she can do in those anniversary months to honor, to help her move beyond, in the sense of, she knows people that were injured there and were
Hmm.
further traumatized, right?
Hmm.
Um, and, her story isn't just the mass shooting.
Yeah.
And the other piece, and that's why I mentioned there can be previous traumas that you don't even you've moved beyond them. In her case, it had to do with sexual assault, not
Hmm.
not a rape, but sexual assault, right? And so, how do you take and help somebody who now has a safety issue, there, that
Right.
lack of safety from one incident, to
Right.
a major lack of safety, like I can't go anywhere, I can't do anything because the world is not safe.
Right. That's
And
the theme, right? That unites
yeah,
these different kinds of traumas. And, as you talked about, it builds and builds over time into a sense of doubting whether we can navigate safely the lives before us. And so, um, it's so, there's so much in what you're saying. It's so important with an anniversary of a trauma to have a proactive plan. And I know that you've worked with your clients on having a proactive plan with their service dogs being a
yeah,
support to their recovery.
yeah. Um, this, the service dogs. So first off, service dogs are never taught to protect.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter what kind of dog it is, if it's a pet, emotional support, a therapy, or a service dog. Um, we're not teaching them aggression. We're not
They're
teaching
not a
them to,
furry bodyguard.
exactly. But in a different way, they are. In a psychological way, they are.
Hmm.
Okay. Because the dog's nose is so powerful that it can tell the difference in a human being's chemistry, whether it is a threat or if
Mm.
the person is perceiving that person as a threat. And one of the first things, especially what we do with our service dogs, is our dogs help them navigate and get an exit, get away. The dogs take them away. And that's so that they can go regroup, ground themselves, come out of the panic attack that they're having, come back into the present moment, because
Hmm.
some of them will just freeze and not even be present. They're somewhere else. It's that frozen moment that the trauma or the perceived threat, right? The perceived threat affects the trauma to the point where they're like, I don't know what to do. And they're
Yep.
shut down. And that's one way that it happens. But the other is they go into full blown panic attack where they're they're feeling that tightness in the chest and they can't breathe. And
Right.
so the dog jumps in and mitigates that, and it alerts them, but then it takes action, and the person has to take action when the dog alerts, and the dog guides them to an exit, guides them out of the crowd, takes them to a safe place so that they can then do the actions that they need to reground, to come back into the present.
Stella is proud to partner with Operation Freedom Paws. Operation Freedom Paws is a 501c3 that provides service dogs to veterans, first responders, children, and others through a no-cost 48-week training program. They provide support for families and continual services. Through their work, Operation Freedom Paws saves lives, empowering their clients to create a new normal and live life to its fullest. Operation Freedom Paws works with Stella to provide stellate ganglion block for those who can benefit as part of numerous programs and services offered to their clients. Visit www.operationfreedompaws.org to learn more about their mission and how you can support this organization. So there's kind of like this dual attunement that happens with service dogs. When we've talked about working dogs in the past, it struck me that attunement to the owner, to the companion, is very important. Who they are serving, their body state, their mental state, the chemical changes in them when they feel that sense of threat, when their anxiety escalates, the dog can sense all of that. There's
Yes.
also this attunement that the dog has to have to the environment as well in terms of potential threats. And I've had a lot of my clients say, my service dog helps me relax because I know that if he or she is relaxed, I can relax.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, talk to that a little bit, and about the importance of people also being able to move to a place where they can potentially feel relaxed, even if their dog isn't with them in a particular scenario. How do they make that transition?
So that comes with time. It doesn't
Okay.
happen right off the bat.
Yeah.
But so your point about being in tune, it's a very symbiotic relationship.
Uh
The
huh.
dog is alerting, the handler has to acknowledge and take action. Okay. So when the dog is out, the dog, 60% of the dog's brain is dedicated to the sense of smell.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's their number one sense. We do a disservice, we turn it upside down because dogs communicate with body language. And so they're mimicking us. We hear something, we see something, we turn our heads, right? And so the
Mm-hmm.
dog begins to learn to do that, and it uses its eyes. So the very first thing is to put it back in balance. And so when you think about that, we're working on putting the dog back in balance. Not every dog can be a service dog, but it's
Mm-hmm.
extremely important for service dogs. Well, then you think about the human with the trauma. What are we trying to do? We're not saying erase the trauma because there's no such thing. What we're
Right.
trying to do is bring some balance back into their lives so that they can create that new normal, and they're doing
Right.
it with the dog.
Giving them
So,
space to use coping
and
strategies that,
without the pressure,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Um, and no offense to the therapists and the docs out there, but, you know, I know that my clients feel that pressure from the therapists and the docs that they need to do X, Y, Z. And so they feel that pressure and it internalizes. Well,
Oh,
here,
interesting.
here comes,
No offense
here,
taken. Yeah.
here
that's
comes the dog.
that's an important point.
Yeah. That's not putting that pressure on,
Mm.
that allows them to process what they've heard from the therapists and the docs,
Yep.
to process what's in their environment.
Right.
And why are they able to do that? Because they trust. And trust is such a huge part of healing,
Yeah.
right? You have to trust the doc, you got to trust the therapist, you got to trust your family, you got to trust your environment. Otherwise, you're not going to go out. You're going to stay in that environment that that is your safe space,
Being
that you
locked
trust.
down, not really
Right.
living,
Not
just
really living.
because you're more motivated to protect your sense of safety. above all.
Yes.
That's the primal threat. I want to pick up on something you said, Mary, that's so important. You said not every dog can be a service dog. So this for me, as I've gotten to know you as a friend and as a partner, has been a partner of Stella's, I should say, not to disrespect your actual partner, and to be clear, um,
Yeah.
to look at the selection of the dog as a really key element of making the right pairing between a dog and their owner or companion, their person. And
Yep.
you can take dogs from a rescue and look for the right dog in there, but you can't turn any dog into a service dog because some of them just don't have the personality or the makeup. And I've been thinking about how maybe service dogs, it's kind of like screening for the people in our society that make good veterans, or not veterans, I should say military service members before they become veterans, military service members or first responders. There's kind of this unique call, and their purpose is grounded in service to others. So they're really looking for a life of service. And I wonder if that analogy extends to the kinds of dogs that you look for in terms of can they be attuned to someone else's needs rather than attuned to their own needs? What are your thoughts on that?
So I don't call it service.
Okay.
What I call it is do they have a desire to work? Do
Okay.
they need to work? Do they want to
Okay.
work? And when you stop to think about this, there's no two human beings that are alike. You know, you might have, similar features, beliefs and all those things, but we're not really identical, right?
Hmm.
And
Right.
even identical trends have some differences. Um, but there's no two dogs that are alike either.
Yeah.
And whether we, and I think this goes back into trauma, the old adage, don't judge the book by its cover,
Uh huh.
is really important because if I see someone who's in a wheelchair, right? I'm not going to assume that they aren't intelligent, that they aren't brilliant, that they don't have something to offer.
Right.
But that's me. Someone else might see that person in a wheelchair and say, "Ah, poor handicapped person, and they're never going to be anything." Well, that is so wrong because we have that tendency to do that with dogs too, right? Where the dog will be in the shelter and it's acting up because it's stressed or whatever it is, and they're like, oh, that dog's too hyper, or that poor dog gets really sad. And we take our own emotions and our own um what's the word I'm looking for, um
Perceptions,
the perceptions and preconceived notions
notions.
and
Yeah.
right and belief
Hmm.
systems that may not even be anywhere near close to being right, and we project those onto animals.
Right.
And so and we get fed that. We get fed that with commercials about, help save this animal, help do this, where it's always that horrible image. And and I'm saying that for a reason because yes, animals experience trauma too. Animals,
Hmm.
dogs will mourn, they will grieve, and
Hmm.
they do it a little differently, but each one of them does it differently, just like each human does it differently. And so that workability, that desire comes from and it's primal. I want to be connected to you. And that's one of the things I look for. Are they drawn to be connected to the human, or are they aloof and could care less? They don't want interaction. They
Oh,
want to
interesting.
be off. So
So
just like
maybe,
in humans, where we
yeah,
have introverts and extroverts, right? You also have that in the dog world,
yeah,
right? Based on our knowledge. So we want that one that's drawn because that comes to your wanting to serve. They
mm,
want that connection. So if we take that back to the trauma,
right,
right? You have a human being who does not want that connection because they have isolated. They're trying to push everything away so that they can feel safe. And along comes this dog that says, "No, I need to take care of you. You're my
Yeah.
everything. I want to take care of you."
Hmm.
And, and so even the person that's saying, "I don't want the connection," really wants some form of connection.
They just
We
move in
all,
on them.
yeah, we all
I
want to be, we all
Yeah.
want to be loved, right? And I'll share
Yeah.
a personal story. My partner
Yeah.
was never an animal person. My golden, 28 years ago
Huh.
would just come over and lay next to the feet, didn't push,
Yeah.
right? And then eventually would come up and put the head in the lap. And it, my golden won my partner over,
Uh,
right? And to the point where
uh,
now my partner has had, 3, 4 dogs of their own. And so
you're
it's,
actually making me think about my dog that you know and were instrumental in helping me find, and
yeah,
have helped me train a little differently. Because I would have said, Jimmy is sitting over there snoozing, snoring, 5 feet away from me right now, as usual. I would have said, he doesn't want to work. But the truth is that he wants to be near me all the time. And if I go downstairs for a drink of water, he's going to be right on my heels. And it's kind of a joke how he is like my shadow. He is always with me. He would go in the bathroom with me if I let him. And so I'm thinking about Jimmy a little bit differently right now in terms of, well, maybe, maybe he does have what it takes to be a service dog. Not that that's something I really need right now, but
well, that's a piece of it. But that desire to take care of and be close,
yeah,
right? And I'm going to point the finger here a little bit,
sure.
but with everything that you deal with every day,
Yeah,
right? And the conversations that you have and talking about trauma and how to help heal it and how to help people.
yeah.
He picks up on that. Your chemistry is changing. When you get
Interesting.
stressed, right? When you're worried about something, whether it's your family or something you're working on, um, you know, trying to help people, learn
Hmm.
more about Stella and the impact and that, yeah, it's not for everybody and it's not going to work for everyone, but it's better than doing nothing at all. And for those that it works for, it's amazing and it's a miracle. But it all comes back to the individual.
Yeah.
So what he's doing is saying, "Hey mom, I'm here if you need me,"
Hmm.
right? And I'll bet you there's times if you stop and you think about it, where you could have been in a conversation and Jimmy got up out of that sleep and came over
Oh, yeah.
and either nudged you or tried to get up in your lap.
Yep.
And what he's trying to say is, "Hey, break this thought, come here, pay attention to me." And in a roundabout way, he did it because
Hmm.
you weren't focused on that anymore. You were focused on him.
Interesting. Very interesting. I'll have
And
to
that's
be more
emotional support.
attuned to him in terms of how he regulates, my sort of headspace. I just know he's been a lot of fun. And, he's been a wonderful thing for my family and, helped connect us all in some different ways, brought a whole new dimension. I mean, he's just love on four legs, this guy. Um, but yeah, it's an interesting thing
So
because
that's emotional support, Shauna.
okay, yeah. I just think of him as my pet, the sort of dog I've wanted for a number of years and denied myself because I've traveled so much and now he's here. Let's talk about Stella. You mentioned that, and we haven't really focused on Stella or SGB much at all, actually, in this whole series. But in our partnership between Stella and Operation Freedom Paws, we have taken some people through a very powerful, might even say miraculous process for some of getting a biological treatment for trauma symptoms, an injection in the neck, and then pairing it with all of the training that you do and the work that you do with the dogs that you pair them with. Can you share some insights from that process or any stories from what you've observed in that?
Yeah, and again, I'm not speaking on Stella's behalf here because these are
Yeah,
my
yeah.
observation. Um, but when we first partnered with Stella, I wasn't sure where in our program we should add this. Because
Hmm.
we're always looking to take that holistic approach, put as many tools in our clients' tool belt as we can so that they can navigate. And so when we first partnered, I picked some that were just starting out in the program, and our program's 48 weeks long. I picked
Hmm.
some that were in the middle of it, and then those that were either about to graduate or had graduated, because I really wanted to know when is the right time to introduce this.
Hmm.
And again, also keeping in mind that um, there's never going to be just one pat answer. But what I did discover is it's not in the beginning, and it should not be in the beginning because they're not ready. They're still trying to figure out the program. They're still trying to figure out the service dog. They haven't learned to trust the dog necessarily just yet. Um, but what it also showed me is they need to be consistently and routinely in talking with, um, their doctor, the therapist. There needs to be that talk support. There needs to be something else tied with, even with the service dogs, they need to be in talk therapy, group therapy, EMDR, whatever the other modality is, but they need to be actively pursuing their own mental well-being.
Right. That's the
And
insights and the trauma processing that's part of that holistic healing
right,
journey.
right. But when introduced at the right time, right, and with a understanding of that the first shot may not work, it may require the second. Um, what I have witnessed has been amazing. That for me, I went with clients. The San Jose center with Dr. Watford was amazing. Their staff was supportive. They let us bring the service dogs in until they went in for treatment, and then I held on to the dog, or their family member held on to the dog. And then once they were back in recovery, we brought the dog back in. And so as they were anxious about going through the procedure, the dog was trying to take care of them. It was alerting, saying, "Hey, pay attention to me," right? And
Yeah.
the dog was worried, right? They come out of it, the dog goes over and sniffs and immediately lays down. It's like, okay, they're good. And
Yeah.
that to
The
me
body
said,
chemistry changed.
the chemistry changed. But that's because I know to trust the dog. I know to trust the dog's nose
Yeah.
and read the dog's body language, right? And their words to describe afterwards was the sense of calmness. Where did the voices go? The voices in my head stopped. And what do I do with this emptiness? What do I do with it? And we're going to fill it with good stuff, right? And that doesn't we're going to focus on filling it with the good stuff, but it doesn't mean we won't have moments that we have to work through, and it doesn't mean you stop everything you're doing, right? Because this isn't the magic bean. It's a culmination of all of your work. So that is really important for them to understand, that it has to be with the other stuff.
It
But
facilitates. It facilitates, it doesn't
yeah,
cure. And the
yes,
voices we're talking about here, to be clear, are not the same voices we might talk about with certain forms of severe mental illness. We're talking about the voice of anxiety that
yes,
becomes a controlling presence for people with trauma, in terms of a tape that constantly plays in their head, directing them to avoid doing this, avoid going there, avoid uh, this person, this social activity, this environment. So that voice quiets
yeah,
when the injection works, the way I've also seen it work. And so people can feel calm again in their own bodies and be opened up to a process of benefiting from everything else that they are receiving in terms of insights, different ways of looking at the world, trauma, relationships, and really create a new normal for themselves.
absolutely. And that ties it back to the severity of the trauma, because
Yep.
I have another client who
Hmm.
has received both. but the severity of his trauma was it, and it's that complex post-traumatic stress, that
Yeah.
complex trauma.
Yep.
Um, so there was a period of time where that calmness and being able to do things was gone, right?
Hmm.
Then other things come in, like, and in this case, it's a veteran. So we talk about Ukraine and Russia. Oh my God. You want to talk
Oh,
about
yeah.
re-triggering? And
Yep.
so, even though all this other stuff was being worked on, along comes Russia and Ukraine, and um, well, let's backtrack because before Russia and Ukraine, it was the pulling out of Afghanistan.
Right. I was going
So
to say the
yeah,
veteran community
the
was rocked by a few
Afghanistan.
major historical events.
Yes.
Kind of like if you had like a root canal and then it was like there was a sensitivity there in that nerve, and then some freezing cold ice water hit that nerve. I mean, that's probably not a great analogy, but to your point, trauma definitely changes how we view future events, and it takes us right back to our past events when
Hmm.
there's similarity in the theme or the magnitude of what we're experiencing. And
Right.
Afghanistan, the way the war ended was that event for a lot of people in our community, Mary.
Oh, absolutely. And for those that served in Iraq and Afghanistan, it really was. And it was with this particular event or with this veteran. But what I discovered, which is awesome, is because he had received both of the injections,
Yeah,
we were able to process it in a different way
yeah,
that got him to the other side of it much sooner. And he
right.
continued to make the forward progress, right? And then we had Russia and Ukraine. And again, we were able to go through it. So, what we're working on now with him and with his therapist and using his dog is for him to be able to have a conversation with his family
Uh huh.
about what he's feeling and his emotions because his go to, which he would go to all the time and stay rooted in, was anger and to push
Hmm.
everything away.
Right.
So now what can be said is, why are you pushing away? We know you're having trouble with your words. We're here, right? Focus on your
Right.
dog and just try to get your words out. You don't need to be angry. You're not angry at us, but you're trying to take that anger out on us. And so what that results in is honest conversation.
Yeah, a different
A
way
different
forward.
way.
To me,
Yeah,
what stellate ganglion block and some of these biological treatments can do for people is really give them back some control over the way that they emotionally respond to the things that happen to them.
right.
Because we certainly, none of us can stop, these global events, local events. We've had the fires in California has been a re-triggering thing for a lot of people. A lot
Yep.
of the wives, the spouses, when the Afghanistan withdrawal happened, they suffered as well and said, I what was it for? What did I sacrifice for when the areas that were taken were retaken? Um, but if you have a sense of calm and control in your own body and you have trusted circles of people like yourself, like the docs that, can come into our lives, you can process and think about how to navigate and not get lost in the sauce. Otherwise, you get ambushed by the intensity of the trauma emotions.
Yeah. And there, to your point, there is a secondary effect on the families.
Hmm.
So teaching the families how to communicate in a way with someone who is really, really angry,
Yeah.
and not own it and not hear the F bombs or the, you know, why are you here? Why don't you leave? And that pushing away and hear it differently
Yeah.
and what it's really, where it's really coming from and meaning. Um, I mean, that's the trauma. And they've been traumatized in living with that
Right.
for so many years.
Yep.
So there again, it's a different type of trauma, but now somebody who is traumatized, right, is lashing out, and it's traumatizing someone else. And if it's repeated over a period of time, right, and that goes back to domestic violence, right? Verbal doesn't have to be physical. So it's that vicious circle that needs to stop.
Yeah, living in a environment that just perpetually feels chaotic and potentially volatile and unsafe. Um,
Yeah,
it's definitely can be a family impact. Definitely.
yeah. And it all comes back to that safety. And so for us, the dog's not just a tool for, our clients, right? The handler at the end of the leash. It's a tool for the family. We teach our families that read the dog's body language. You'll know what's going on. And before it gets to this point, say, hey, what's your dog telling you? And we tell our clients, if your family member says that to you, it's okay for them to do that. Pay attention to your dog.
Interesting. So the
It's
dog
in,
goes in as a bit of a mini translator, an
yes,
emotional translator for maybe not just the person who suffered from primary trauma, but the secondary trauma as well. And you and I want to make this point before I forget, as people who are close to war fighters, and you're a veteran yourself of the Army, we would be the first to say that not everybody who has trauma becomes angry or rageful. Some people do, other people withdraw. And there are
yeah,
just as many that I've worked with who have just kind of drawn into themselves and felt like they're a burden or they're unworthy of love or belonging, or that going out in public makes them really uncomfortable. So the task is a different task. It's to draw them out of that self imposed or trauma imposed prison that they're living in and really help them re engage with their loved ones and with a meaningful life. So I don't want to promote any kind of stereotype that
oh no,
people
there
with
is
trauma
no
are
stereotype.
rageful. Just want to clarify. I know you agree with me, but let's,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. It's just in the ones we were talking about, anger was one of those issues,
yeah,
right?
that's a
Where
specific, case and can be a presentation, but not applying to everybody.
right, yeah. We all react to trauma differently.
Yeah, we do for sure. Mary, I can't believe this, but where does the time go? Anytime I jump on the phone with you, or whether it's a live telecast that we're doing or a podcast, I just feel like we could go on and get into some really great stuff. But thank you for what you shared today. And just any last words about, where people can find you or Operation Freedom Paws and the work and the mission you're on?
Yes, and thank you for asking that. Our website is www.operationfreedompaws.org. We're on Facebook as operationfreedompaws.org, Twitter, Instagram, um, and we don't charge for anything that we do. We rely on donations, and I know everybody is worried about what's going on in the world with the economy and where things are headed, and we're right in that same boat. But it costs us about $20,000 per dog team, and I can tell you, my life is rich and blessed because I have seen people thrive, not just, you know, move through life, but actually thrive, become doctors, go back to school, go back to work, um, and live life and to the best that they can. And what more can
I've
we
seen
ask
your
for?
clients do that.
Yeah.
That's been the one of the pleasures of our friendship is I get to see you move people through that healing and dig in, find that purpose and really go after it. We're grateful to Mary not only for joining us on the podcast, but for everything she's done for our country and its veterans. Operation Freedom Paws has helped countless veterans and their family members. OFP offers an innovative, holistic program for those experiencing trauma that combines biological treatment with a full year of high quality training. I consider Mary to be a fellow healer and a friend who's on the